We start today with a special guest. He was the Labor Secretary under President Clinton, Robert Reich. Although he was a member of the President Obama's Economic Transition Advisory Board, he has become a vocal critic of this White House's economic policies. Now, in his new book, Aftershock, The Next Economy and America's Future, Robert Reich says finding a solution to our current economic ills will be difficult unless the income gap in this country is rebalanced. Secretary Reich, welcome to Taking Stock. Good to have you with us.
It's good to be here, Pimm.
What's the premise of the book for those that have yet to thumb through it, to look at the cover? This is about the inequality in earnings and in wealth in the United States.
Yes, in the past 100 years, there have only been 2 years, Pimm, in which the top 1% by income have actually received almost a quarter of total national income. And those 2 years are 1928 and 2007. Now, I'm not suggesting a direct relationship between what happened in 1929 and 2008, but I do think it's very important to understand that when you've got huge concentration of income at the top, the middle class, working class, vast number of Americans don't have the purchasing power they need to keep the economy going without going deeper and deeper into debt. And eventually that debt bubble bursts.
And you also make the point in the book that there doesn't seem to be an incentive. If people feel that the game is, in a sense, rigged before they even try, that chokes off risk-taking to a certain extent.
Yes. In fact, what we're seeing, and you saw this in the 1930s as well, when people feel economically insecure, they are fodder for demagogues who come along and want to blame immigrants or foreign trade or some other scapegoat that is not really the source of the problem. But it creates a very ugly and very angry politics.
So what is to be done? What are some of the steps that need to be taken in order to address this problem?
Well, you said in your introduction redistribution of income, and I'm not really saying that. I am saying let's make sure that the economy is structured in such a way that the middle class, the old working class, gets their sufficient share of economic growth that they can turn around and buy. This is good for people at the top. It's better to have a smaller share of a rapidly growing economy where there's enough demand coming from the vast number of Americans than it is to have a large share of an economy that can't get out of the gravitational pull of the Great Recession because there's not sufficient aggregate demand.
So does this also promote social stability? Because if you have that more equal distribution, that promotes more social cohesiveness between groups.
Yes, that's right. But you just said equal distribution. And again, I don't want to be understood to be redistributionist in the sense of taking money out of rich people's pockets and giving it to people in the middle class. Again, not only are you better off if you are at the top with a smaller share of a rapidly growing economy, but you're also better off with a smaller share of a rapidly growing economy that fosters a politics of positive collaboration than you are with a large share of a very slowly growing economy that fosters a very angry and very divisive politics.
So what are some of the rules or regulations that need to change in order to bring about this kind of different way of looking at the economic pie, the ecosystem that exists?
Well, in the short term, it seems to me very important to do things like, for example, exempt the first $20,000 of income from payroll taxes and make up the difference by applying the payroll tax to incomes over, say, $500,000. Or also extending the earned income tax credit, which is now Milton Friedman's idea, remember, applied to very poor people. It is a wage supplement, extended all the way up to the middle class. Give them a wage supplement. And how do you pay for it? Well, perhaps a carbon tax that actually creates innovation because it creates incentives in the private sector to come up with non-carbon-based fuel and efficient alternative energy sources.
Now, what do you make of the current political environment? Why are not some of these ideas being adopted, if at any rate, by the Democrats who control both houses of Congress and the White House?
Well, I think there's a lot of intimidation coming. Nobody wants to be seen or even charged with being a class warrior. I'm not a class warrior. I'm a class worrier, W-O-R-R-I-E-R. But also, I think the word tax is just a third rail of American politics. Nobody wants to even utter the word tax at all in this climate. But I'm going to make a prediction right now on this show with you, Pimm, and that is that in 2 years' time, if the economy continues to have unemployment that is anywhere around 9.5, 9.6%, which I think is very likely. If we still see economic growth under 3% annualized, which I think is very likely, we're going to see both parties begin to respond to the kind of arguments that I'm making. Because people at the top are going to say, wait a minute, this is bad. It's dangerous economically, and it's very dangerous politically.
Now, one of the perhaps reasons why we're in this situation is the collapse of the housing market that we've all gone through. Right. Is there an area of the market, whether it be politicians or whether it be regulators, is there some group out there that didn't get the message about housing prices, that we were in a bubble? Is there some responsibility to be taken for this boom in housing and then the fall off?
Yeah, Pimm, I think there's so much responsibility out there. There in terms of bank lenders, Wall Street, regulators who were not paying attention, people who got loans that they should not have got. We can almost blame everybody. The point, though, and I think a very important point, and I want to argue this, and I argued it in the book, is not that we are in the problem fundamentally because Americans spent more than they earn or beyond their means. The problem is their means did not keep up with a rapidly growing economy.
Right. There was an incentive out there for them to actually take money out of their houses, but that was because, as you described, they weren't making the money necessary in order to live.
Exactly. I mean, starting in the late 70s, I mean, median wages for men absolutely flattened, adjusted for inflation. So what do families do to keep up their standard of living, to keep growing in terms of spending, which is good for the economy? Number one, women go poor into the paid workforce. Number two, everybody works longer hours. And finally, number three, you go deeper and deeper into debt, using your housing prices that rise as collateral for refinancing and home equity loans. But obviously, you can't do all of that forever. There is a time of reckoning, and that's what we are facing now.
Now, there are some investors who made out quite well because of the reckoning, because they were able to see at least a little bit into the future what was going to happen with housing prices, with subprime mortgages. Is that the corrective force that we need in the marketplace, or is there something more structural that can be done?
Well, it has to be structural. I mean, here's what worries me. I mean, a lot of corporate profits right now, and a lot of the good news on the stock market is because companies are using their cash, and there's a lot of cash around in big companies, to repurchase their shares of stock, to automate and cut their payrolls, to go abroad and sell abroad, or to do a variety of other things that don't create jobs but are kind of temporary measures that create profits, but they are temporary. The most important thing to understand is that this little rally we are now engaged in cannot continue if American consumers, who comprise 70% of our market, can't turn around and buy. And that's the underlying problem.
Well, is there also a change in the people's attitude towards the value of work? Because work is also equated with producing things and creating products and services, but it seems to also be connected with financial engineering now. Is it going to take also a cultural change in terms of how we view work?
I think so, Pimm. I mean, we have an awful lot of people in this country that have nothing to do with Wall Street and who are sitting on their hands. They can't find a job. But we have a lot of people on Wall Street or in financial markets, and I don't mean in any way to be demeaning to anybody, but if they're basically in the job of simply moving money from one set of pockets to another set of pockets, or outmaneuvering some other set of financiers, you're not really creating new, innovative products and services. What you're doing simply is maintaining a game, and that game is not really productive.
You mentioned at the very beginning these two dates, the idea being that you have a very small segment of the population garnering a quarter of the wealth of the United States. Is it going to take a crisis for people to act?
Well, we had something of a crisis, remember, in 2008, and we learned one important lesson from the Great Depression, and that was when you're in and on the edge of a financial crisis, what you want to do is flood the market with money. You want to maintain as much liquidity as possible. But we did not learn the second lesson of the Great Depression, which was you've got to reorganize the market entirely. You've got to restructure American capitalism so that more people have more stake and more to gain from economic growth.
I want to thank you very much, former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, now professor at University of California, Berkeley, and the author of the new book, Aftershock. We're going to have to take a look at that. Aftershock, all about the inequality in earnings.